People who got sentenced to jail in the 90s or 2000s and got released this year. What does it feel like being in today's 2018? What shocked you the most? About 10 years ago I was unemployed and went to one of these employment centers looking for a job for the first time in a long time, which ended up basically being a sort of internet cafe where you use the computers to job search, create resumes, etc. I sat down by an older gentleman who just stared into the screen with his hands in his lap. An employee came by and asked him if he needed help, which he agreed and stated he had been incarcerated for like 30 years and had never used a computer. She sat down and told him to use the mouse to move the cursor to an icon etc. etc. This dude gave the mouse a sharp jab with his finger like he was pushing an elevator button. That slid the mouse across the mouse pad and onto the table. The look on the lady's face was priceless when she realized she had to teach this guy to how to use a computer from ground freaking zero. She was puzzled where to even begin. That's wild. My dad is a prison chaplain. One of his inmates had been in for about 30 years and got out last year. My dad got a call from him a few days later. "Chap, did you know they have toilets that flush themselves?" Oh, the things we take for granted these days. My mother just got released after a 15-year prison sentence. The weirdest thing to her is the cell phones. She thinks it's crazy that everyone is attached at the hip to their phones, and that you can look anything up in an instant. Also gas prices. They definitely threw her for a loop. She offered to gas my vehicle up because I helped her run some errands. She didn't realize that it was going to cost $50 LOL. She also thinks it's wild that my brothers and I can play games together and not be in the same house. The first time she called and I told her that I was playing Destiny 2 with my brothers, she thought they were actually in the living room with me. It still freaks her out that we live in different states and can play together. I was told a story by this ex-felon who had a cellmate that finally got released after 30+ years in prison. He gave the guy his phone number because he knew that transitioning into the real world would be rough. He went on to say that he got a call from his cellmate at a grocery store in a corner crying because the selection in the store was too much for him to handle. Mostly the different varieties of items. Different brands have grown in the past 30+ years. Also, the use of self-checkout machines can be confusing. I learned about this in Business 101 in college. That if you overwhelm your consumer with too many options, it leads to lower sales. Sometimes that happens to me in a grocery store. Too many options, so I buy nothing. Saw a dude on the news who'd been in jail for like 50 or 60 years. He said the craziest thing was seeing all the crazy colored Gatorades. That and he thought everyone was an FBI agent because of their earbuds. Dude, Bluetooth headphones must have been invented to help federal agents blend in around normal folk while they talk to no one. Now it doesn't even look weird. I remember working at McDonald's and having an ex-convict come in and being outraged at the prices. A Big Mac was twice the price he was used to. Twice. Like 2 times. Combined with twice. I like it. Not a felon, but I did have a lengthy phone call with an ex-con at work once where I went in circles trying to explain the concept of attachments to emails. I also had to explain that fax and email were separate things. I have to have those same conversations with my 75 years old mother. Was at the corner store and some guy walks in with his buddy, who was acting a little weird. He points to some Red Bull and asked what are those. His buddy tells him they get you jacked, like amped up. Gets you going. His buddy left with like 5 of them. I'm assuming he just got out of lockup. Gave me a chuckle. Oh, it must be so weird to be an adult and never have had a Red Bull before. I wouldn't actually have on ever again, I think, but I am just imagining myself at 40 totally getting addicted to Red Bull because I never had them before. I worked with a lot of felons. One guy had been in prison for 38 years. He said everything is different. The cars are so different and quiet. Everyone is on their phones. The phones are weird. People have phones in their pockets. Vehicles definitely were a lot noisier in the older days and street scenes were a bigger assault on your ears. I remember it from the early mid-1990s and have also seen archive footage from the 1960s and 70s where it's slightly worse. I went to rehab a few years ago and one of the guys there with me just got out of prison after a 20-year sentence for being a huge M dealer. He said cell phones blew his mind and he's so confused about gas pumps now because of the option to pay with cards at the pump and how different they look. Just wait until he see one with a freaking TV in it. I knew a guy who was in for around 15 years. I told him I like games and he was asking if I had a chance to play this or that game on PS2. I said I didn't and he said I should get it. They weren't classics or anything but sports games that came out at the time. Unless he was talking about MVP Baseball 2005. That game was a freaking classic. In like 2015 I met a guy who went to jail in 1997 and had just got out. The big thing he noticed was that there weren't as many large groups of youth out and about like when he was a kid. He said the saddest thing he saw was going to the local park and seeing almost nobody there at 6 p.m. When he went in the 1990s there were typically 50-60 young people hanging out, skating around and socializing. He said people aren't out on their stoops socializing as much. He doesn't see nearly as many people out and about on Friday and Saturday nights. I suppose the way we socialize has changed so much since then. Back then the only way you could socialize was by leaving your house and hanging out with friends. Even doing nothing with friends was preferable to just hanging out inside. Today people don't do that as much. I was in jail before, during and after the 2016 election and it was weird to see people slowly find out that Trump had become president. The police didn't tell anyone who had won and we had to wait for all the new inmates to come in. Most people thought they were lying when they said Trump won, especially people who had been in since before Obama. I keep picturing the scene from Shawshank Redemption where Brooks is released from prison after decades of incarceration. The world has changed so much that he's overwhelmed and doesn't last long on the outside. I can't imagine how hard it must be to acclimate if you don't have good support. That scene was so sad. If I remember the quote correctly, didn't he say he was in there for 50 years, released in 1955 and going into prison in 1905, coming out after 2 world wars? Television, radio, cars and everything you would have known changed. A friend of my dad's just got released a while back. He was in for about 8 years and the other day he was talking to my dad about how vaping is so healthy for you, and he has individual ringtones for each of his contacts. He's hilarious, but we don't mention anything about how behind he is. It's not as extreme an amount of time as others, but you can tell he's still adapting. I used to work in prison. I recall a lifer going out for the day and being mind blown by ATMs and a moving conveyor belt at the supermarket. My best friend got out in January after 12 years. He can't handle the awesomeness of Netflix. Also booking crap online. I still teaching him Amazon. Oh, and you pick your seat at the movie theater. I'm not really over that yet either. Last thing, cutie oranges. Thought of another. He loves that YouTube now has a video for everything. Want to fix your golf swing? There is video. Want to properly cut up a papaya or tie a certain kind of fly fishing lure? Video. Went to jail in 1995. Came out in 2013. Obviously smartphones and whatnot have been a big difference. But the biggest difference to me is simply that I rarely see kids outside. Anyone who remembers the 80s and 90s remembers that past 5 p.m. there were groups of youth aging 16-28 literally roaming everywhere. I mean just huge groups of youth standing around at corners drinking and smoking. The parks were filled with them doing drugs and whatnot. After 9 p.m. blocks were basically overrun with youth. Parties were everywhere. Even the losers had zero trouble finding some crazy party to go to. I've been out for a while and traveled all over the states. The one universal change I will say is that I rarely see that kind of youth culture anymore. I am not sure if there are just 3/4 less kids or if the kids are just all inside now. Youth culture used to be in your face constantly. People used to stand on the street corners with boom boxes and have breakdance competitions with plenty of drugs passed around. I haven't seen anything even remotely similar to that. Another thing is crime. Crime used to be everywhere, even normal, well-to-do people know about and were often even slightly engaged in some form of crime. They often had siblings that were into crime, or new neighbors who were into it. If you ever wanted anything extra done that was illegal, there was always guys you could go to. There was your normal life, then there was your sort of underground life. Almost everyone had one, or knew plenty of people that were into it. I remember as a youth me and my friends used to sell Lucy cigarettes and transport stolen goods from store to store for this seedy Italian guy on our block. In my early 20s we used to help find guys to pay off landlords to let us throw parties on their rooftops. Everyone did this sort of stuff. That was considered kind of normal youth stuff back then. Today that would seem like something only a serious criminal would do. Even our parents had their dealings with shady characters. Those are really the two biggest changes I've noticed. Thank you so much for this answer. The media these days loves to throw crime in your face and so many people believe that crime rates are higher than ever. But dang, that's not true. Mass shootings, maybe. I feel exactly what you're saying. Everybody knew somebody. Now, it's just not like that anymore. Not prison, but I recently met a woman who entered a cloistered convent in the late 2000s and discerned out about 7 years later. They were allowed to have visitors and could write letters, but couldn't leave other than to go to the doctor and such, and she didn't have any contact with technology. She said the biggest change she noticed after coming back to society at large was how prevalent smartphones were and their impact on society. She said that she remembered the first iPhone being out before she entered, but smartphones still seemed like a novelty. She had seen visitors with them in the time she was in the convent, but didn't realize how prevalent they were. And she said that it was weird that in less than 10 years they went from a novelty to incredibly prevalent, and almost an expectation for you to have one to be a normal part of society. She noticed a big change in people's behaviors and how they interact with one another, most prominently having shorter attention spans and seeming distant even when in the same room. She said she had to learn the lingo around smartphones too. For example, she didn't know what app meant at first. The other thing that she said came to mind was changes in language. The two biggest things she pointed out was people saying that something was a thing and how much more commonly people said stuff like I got this or I got you. Not me, but a friend's older brother was in prison for 8 years from 2003 to 2011. He was most shocked about how much movies had changed and how much detail they had now. Also was shocked about computers. I met a guy who'd been in since the 90s and he kinda dressed styled like Vanilla Ice when he got out. I think his dad still had all his clothes. I only served a couple months back in 2015. I was released alongside a man who was in between 20-25 years. I forget exactly, but it was a lot. All of the people in my program were in great spirits after only being in for a couple months. We had our girlfriends picking us up, talking about our plans, just bullshitting around. This guy looked scared, as I wanted to leave every single one of my possessions behind. This guy had everything with him: a TV that still has the RCA connection, a CD player, all his clothes, some food, and a couple pairs of shoes. He knew he was in for a shock. This is sad and I hope he had a good support system on the other side. I was an angry youth, ended up with the wrong people and became an antisocial unempathic freak. Got sent to rehabilitation after beating a guy completely senseless in 2005. The rehab center decided I was a lost cause and to keep me away from society until I was no longer a threat. I went in believing the world was a dark, crappy place, reinforced by my own shady actions that humans are inherently bad. I expected no change in myself and didn't mind dying at any time. 10 years later and a ton of counseling, therapy, and genuine personality change and I felt ready to leave and see the world again. It was odd. When I went in, I saw something bad lurking inside every human I met. I was distrustful and felt like I could see into their dark soul. When I got out, that had changed. A smile seemed genuine and made me happy. A person being courteous and just greeting me with a smile made me feel some love for them. The world seemed bright and my optimism and love felt untouchable. As for technology, the weirdest part to it just wasn't necessarily smartphones but everything. All technology had improved to the point where nothing could surprise me. When I bought a pack of batteries, I remember thinking I bet these last 10 times longer now. Boy was I wrong. The batteries do last way longer and hold way more power, but the things you're putting them in require way more power and drain it way quicker. Try powering a smartphone with the battery from a StarTAC. I have an employee who served 11 years. Coming back to real life is hard for these dudes. He won't go into a convenience store if it's too crowded. He can't handle himself around proper people because he is desocialized. My brother is in now, incarnated in November 2017 and won't get out until 2031 unless a miracle happens. I can't imagine what kind of world he'll be rejoining. I wish there was a feature on Reddit to bring me back to this thread once there were some answers. Sounds like a good topic. Save it and check back on it, that's what I'm doing. My best friend was in jail for a considerable time. He didn't know how to use the new touchscreen washing machines, iPhone or even the dishwasher. Also wireless headphones blew his mind. Had to teach him how to call and message people and use apps. He is addicted to social media now. Mayo. Family member got released after about 5 years. He said the most surprising thing is all the radio stations still play the same music. Like, only 1/3 of it is new to him. He wasn't in for that long, but it still shines a light on the music industry and radio. I wasn't in prison, but enlisted into the military in early 09 and did most my training here in the States for that year, so I wasn't completely out of the loop. But after finishing boot camp and training for my job in 09, I was stationed overseas for 2 years. Upon arrival to my new duty station, I got an iPhone 3GS but quickly lost it within a month and never bothered getting another one. On base the internet was practically 56k modem speeds for whatever reason. I think it was due to insufficient infrastructure to provide service to so many people. So my internet usage was limited because of slow speeds and limited free time from work. I remembered Christmas New Year's of 2010. Command didn't approve leave for us to go home so that we would be ready to deploy if necessary. Everyone ended up getting all boozed up at the barracks and I mostly spent my time playing my PS3 offline because of the aforementioned crappy internet. So basically from 2009 through 2011, during the rise of online video streaming services and smartphones, I missed out on all of that. It wasn't prison or anything, so I was aware, but didn't experience any of it firsthand. Coming back to the States the beginning of 2012 was like traveling a couple of years into the future. Netflix used to arrive by mail, but all of a sudden, the fact that I could access any show I want all from a single website blew my mind. In the span of the 2 to 3 years, internet speeds increased exponentially for the same cost. Didn't help that I spent that whole time with archaic internet while on base. In 09 I had a PSP for portable gaming and had to lug around multiple UMDs. Now I can just go to the app store and download from a plethora of mobile apps on my smartphone all at 4G speeds. So while it wasn't as drastic as being in prison from the early 2000s until 2018, even those couple of years in the early 2010s where I was away was pretty crazy when I returned. I can only imagine what it'd be like for anyone locked away for 5, 10, 20 or more years. I bet they wonder why, before they entered prison, people used to say that they graduated from college, and now they just say that they graduated college. That would be an unsettling shift. My uncle was incarcerated in '85. Several years ago we went for a visit and took snacks. The plastic grocery bag blew his mind. I wasn't in jail, but I was in the Navy and placed overseas in a country where technology was already lagging behind 20 years. I went overseas in 2005 and finally got back stateside in 2014. I did take 30 days leave back home once in 2007, but not much had changed in that amount of time. When I finally came back in 2014, the biggest change was that everyone had a smartphone and I was still using a Nokia, and everyone hassled me until I finally caved to get one. I enjoy my smartphone, but I am fine without it. Strangers are usually not as friendly as they used to be. Found out that I can't take a pee on the side of the road anymore. I miss my N64. The PS4 games all suck to me. LOL. I actually bought a GamerCube after I had come back, since I never had the chance to play it before. Going from AOL dial-up to high-speed internet wasn't actually that impressive. I quickly get frustrated with load times. Facebook was cool. Kinda boring though. LOL. I remember one day where I had spent all night looking up cat photos on Google. OK, went to jail for 8 years from 2004 to 2012. The fricking internet, man. Fricking YouTube was amazing. Also smartphones blew my mind. I was in prison from 2003 to 2011. Wasn't really surprised by much of anything. Inside, we watched television every day and the commercials prepared me for the technology. I had the New York Times delivered to my cell cube daily. We had radios, news, BBC, NPR, etc. Smartphones really weren't that difficult to grasp. I came of age during the early internet era, and so smartphones were just mini computers with touch screens. If anything, technology was more user-friendly than it had been before I went away. You see, it's not the technology that's difficult to adapt to, it's the people. There is a prison culture, and once you adapt to it you learn to respect and even appreciate it. You see the same people every day and it's a tense, testosterone-driven environment. Negotiating the unspoken rules means understanding the importance of showing respect without showing fear, and the only way to do that honestly is to get in touch with yourself. To overcome your insecurities. To quiet your righteous anger. To develop a sense of when it's time to move out of the way and when it's time to stand your ground. This culture forces you to become a man among men. Coming home to a society of selfish, arrogant, disrespectful, self-assured adult children who glorify their minor struggles on social media and perpetuate this culture of self-identified victimization was, and continues to be, difficult. In prison, not only will you not be celebrated for your so-called courage in aggrandizing your victimization, you'll be mocked for not handling the problem like a man. Out here it seems almost a contest as to who can cry the loudest and blame the most. In my personal life, the same people crying wolf and routinely shifting blame are the ones who dismiss me as a human being because of my prison experience. Ironically, my prison experience is the same reason I dismiss them. And so I feel a chasm has grown between the man I became in prison and the culture I came home to as a 32-year-old adult. And every time I sense someone of relevance in my life dismiss my opinion, subtly condescend to me, gossip about me just out of earshot, etc., I feel that chasm grow. That was an incredible read. Thank you for that. Outside In is a Douglas film that was just released on Netflix the other day. It deals exactly with this question really beautifully. Talked to a fella that went in around 1992 and was released this year. His first experience trying to do job applications online blew him away, and the thought of being able to just type in and go CP was absolutely absurd to him. I work in a restaurant and someone who was very recently released, IDK how long he had been in for, asked for plastic utensils. He said he wasn't used to metal cutlery anymore and could taste the metal, which we thought was interesting. Not something I would have ever considered otherwise. I was a CO right after college a couple years ago in a work release program. We had a guy who was locked up 25 years ago for murder when he was 19. His crime, a burglary gone wrong, and ended up strangling a man to death with a phone cord. He got a smartphone after he started working and he looked like a 3-year-old playing with it because he had no idea what to do. We ended up showing him a bit about it so he could use it, but it was still interesting. Overall though, you'd be surprised the access people have to the outside nowadays, at least in lower security prisons. They'll have libraries with computers. Visits can be done through video kiosks by their families at their own house. TVs in their day rooms, so new tech will not be like time travel as much as it is just hard for them to interact in a much more advanced present. A guy I knew who went into jail and came out 10 years later and said the first thing he had to do was go shopping for new clothes cause all his clothes were from the 90s. I don't see any problems here. I still have denim and flannel. The frick is this USB looking crap, and it's rallies in heat smoke too and people are inhaling it, and this is a frickin' fire hazard, and why does everyone who has this death stick look 11? Not jail, but a 2-year mission trip to Paraguay from 2009 to 2011. I was no longer able to watch TV, use the internet, except for a 30-minute email sesh per week. Couldn't call home or use phones for anything other than setting meetings and missionary duties. Spoke a foreign language even. Overall it was a retreat to a much more primitive way of life while the world passed on. Things I learned about upon returning. Who Justin Bieber is. I think I missed the height of Bieber fever. I had a cell phone before I left, but only the rich kids had smartphones. iPhone 3G was really the only one out there. When I returned, the iPhone 4 had grasped America and changed every expectation. I felt like I was in the future with that in my hand. The simplicity of using the internet was now as quick as pulling out my phone, something I remember scoffing about when I first heard of smartphones. Dubstep was a foreign and absolutely shocking sound, having just returned from a very quiet and spiritual lifestyle. I honestly thought immediately about how stupid and crazy the world had become for loving this stuff. That being said, I warmed up to it and still enjoy it on occasion. The huge song at the time was Party Rock Anthem, and that was an abomination. Another big one that I had no clue about was the tablet. The iPad and iPad 2 came out in America while I was gone. I had no clue what to do with it. Come to think of it, I still wonder what it really does that makes it so different from a phone or a laptop. The last interesting thing I remember was that upon returning to the US I went to buy a bunch of new clothes since I was no longer dressing as a missionary. Shirt and tie. Since all I had known for 2 years was the fashion of Paraguay, which is pretty different, I had merged it with my 2-year-old American fashion. I went to a Nordstrom rack thinking I knew exactly what I wanted: skinny jeans. This was 3 years after I finished high school, and there was this really simple looking boot I had seen many of the more impoverished kids wear in Paraguay during the winter. It was a working boot, likely made in Brazil from scrap leather and very chunky rubber soles. I liked it because it got so beat up in the dirt and mud, but it kept on trucking. It really felt like a humble shoe. The poorest people had these. They were enough to survive with. I figured it would be a memento of the ones I loved in Paraguay, even if everyone in America thought they were ugly. I was very surprised to find it on the shelves of that Nordstrom. The same shape and style of boot I had seen all the poor kids wear in Paraguay. I found a pair that were made by what I remembered to be kind of a grandma brand, like orthopedic shoes or whatever. They were Clark's Desert Chuckers. When I went to buy them, the cashier said, "No lie, oh I love these. This is the boot of the year." My step-uncle Dave was in prison for 35 years for murder, and he got out a few months ago. I had never met him until a few days ago, but he's one of the nicest men I've ever met. He was most surprised by how different everything was, and he cried the first time he used a metal fork. He's a little bit of a clean freak, but he's an awesome guy. A friend of mine was in prison for 6 years, got out about 4 years ago. His first post on Facebook was, "Well, I guess no one uses MySpace anymore." If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.